RC needs no introduction, but I just want to mention that RC has been an elder at this church for 6 years. Last year he took a break, and we graciously accepted his year of rest, and he was just reelected and brought back onto the board just this month, along with Deborah. Deborah, where are you? Oh, she may be counting the offering at this point, but we're just so very grateful that we have the leadership that we do here at Open Door, and I just want to say I trust RC's heart. I trust his words, I trust his love and his passion for Christ, and it is just a joy for me to be able to work with someone who has the integrity and the commitment that RC does. Would you welcome RC this morning?
Got the mic turned on there? Got it? Okay. Hey, first off, I'd like to say that, oh, yeah, a little clicker. Can't forget that, right? First, I want to say, if I go along and I make a reference to something and you're totally clueless to it, just go ahead, raise your hand up, and I'll stop and explain it. Because I figured out that I got old somehow, and that not everybody gets my references anymore. You know, I teach college, and in one of my college classes, I tell them this. I say, look, if I make a reference to something you don't get it, be brave, put your hand up, I'll explain what it is. You know, it's probably something from long, long ago. And the other day I was in class and I made a reference to Greg Brady. And about half the class had this puzzled look on their face. They're like, huh? And finally one brave soul goes, yes, who's Greg Brady? I said, oh, I'm so old. You have no idea. I'm like, well, he was the not cute one. You know, Peter was much cuter. So anyway, they're like, the Brady Bunch? Is that like an old TV show or something? I'm like, yeah, that's what that is. It's an old TV show. Anyway, we're going to be talking about parables this morning. We've been talking about parables on Friday night, so I thought, well, we'll bring some of Friday night here to Sunday morning. And parables are great. A lot of times you'll have a lot of preachers talk about parables. You'll have different teachers talk about parables. One of the reasons they're so great is because they're little tiny chunks. They're already all pre-chunked for you, right? You just take a little tiny chunk and you work on that. But the problem with that approach of just taking little tiny chunks of parables, the problem with that approach is they're usually part of a bigger piece of discourse. They're usually part of a bigger overall picture. And by taking them out of their context and just focusing on just that one parable, you sometimes miss the point of what they're all about. Oftentimes, too, when we take these parables, we forget to put them back into the context of their Jewish culture where they came from. Many, many of the parables, the images are not original with Christ. He's quoting from Old Testament prophets who use the same images, use the same symbols. So you have to understand, oh, this is what it meant to them when they heard these symbols. So that's what we're going to attempt to do this morning, put some of this stuff back into its context. All right, let me see if I can get this to work. I'm not quite... There you go. What we're going to talk about this morning is a series of parables that comes from what's called the Olivet Discourse. Jesus went up to the Mount of Olives, sat up there, and for 2 chapters in Matthew, he gives these long series of explanations, and that's called the Olivet Discourse, and that's where we're going to be this morning. So let's kind of do the setup. Okay? Jesus had been teaching in the temple. And he finished teaching, and as he's walking out there with his disciples, and one of his disciples points out the temple. He goes, look at this magnificent temple. Isn't this incredible? It was built by Solomon. You know, it had gone through some destruction, but it's been rebuilt. Look how beautiful it is, all this kind of, and they're kind of pointing out some architectural features and things like that. And then Jesus says something kind of odd. He says, you know, there's going to come a day when the temple is going to be destroyed. And they're all like, oh, that's kind of scary. And it's like, okay, so now, Jesus, since we're talking about the future, could we ask you a couple of questions about the future? And so the disciples look at him and say, hey, you know, there's this one question we've been meaning to ask you for a while. We're your disciples. You know, we gave up our jobs. We've been following you around the countryside for a while. And, we've all confessed, you're the Messiah. You're the one we've been waiting for. You're supposed to come and set up your kingdom, and we're going to reign, with you, right? And we know you're the... could you maybe answer one little question for us? When, we've been following you around for a while, and when's this going to happen? When are you going to take control? When you going to have the power? And that was the big question on all of their minds was when? When are you supposed to come in your glory? When are you suddenly going to overthrow this oppressive government that we're on and set up your kingdom and we're all going to rule right beside you? Lord, when? Now? That would be great. Next week? A month? I mean, we have been kind of following you around out here in the desert for a while. It's, they're looking at a sundial, by the way. Okay? And Jesus answers their question by giving them some signs of what it's going to be. Now, oftentimes in Matthew chapter 24, we have a lot of folks who get really interested in this stuff. It's like, ooh, this is the signs of the end times. And you get all those books written about it, right? All the people who love to stand up and preach about that, and they all start predicting dates, and they all point to Matthew chapter 24. They go, oh, see, this is what's happening right now. It's this, it's this, it's this. It's going to happen any day now. And so they start talking about a lot of that. Some of the signs that he talked about, I don't want to go there yet. Some of the signs he talked about were things like there'll be many false messiahs, there'll be false prophets, there'll be wars, there'll be famines, there'll be earthquakes. And those are kind of general. Wars and famines and earthquakes, because we've had quite a few of those. And that's why everybody gets so excited. They're like, a war broke out. This is the end. Like, no, not quite. Another famine broke out. This is the end. No, not yet. Okay? Another earthquake just happened. Well, we live in California. There's an earthquake every day somewhere in California. It's not happening yet. But he gives them one big final sign. He says, look, he said, the prophet Daniel prophesied about something called the abomination that makes desolate. And when you see that, that's the end. We're like, okay, we get it. And then he goes on to say something else, though. It's about, let's not worry about the end. Just be ready for the end. Well, how do you get ready for the end? And he starts teaching a series of parables. And the first parable that he starts with is called the parable of the faithful and the wise servant. He says, look, you want to be ready? Don't worry about earthquakes and wars and famines. Don't worry about the abomination that makes desolate. Don't worry about all these signs. Don't try to figure out the date, because nobody knows the date. Nobody knows the date. Nobody knows the time. He says, but if you want to be ready, here's what you got to do. He says, it's like a master who has gone away. And he turns to one of his servants and he says, look, I'm going to go away for a little while. And while I'm gone, you're in charge. And you take care of the other servants. You feed them, you clothe them, you take care of them, make sure they get their wages. They do do all this stuff for me while I'm gone. You're going to sub in for me while I'm gone. And then he leaves. And he says, the faithful and the wise servant is the one that when the master comes back, he's doing exactly what he was told to be doing, to take care of his fellow servants, to feed them, to clothe them, to house them, to take care of them. He says, but suppose that servant were a very wicked servant, what would he do? He says, well, if he were a wicked servant, he'd say, well, the master's gone for a long, long time. Probably not coming back. I think I'll just start beating the servants. I think I'll start mistreating them. I won't give them their fair wages. I won't feed them like they should. He says, and sure enough, when the master does come back, he's going to see this wicked servant, and he will punish him. So Jesus says, be ready. So that whenever the master comes back, be doing what he told you you should be doing. How many people have seen the bumper sticker? Jesus is coming, look busy. Okay? It's more than just looking busy. It's actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. Faithful and the wise servant. He goes on and he tells a second parable along the same theme. Sometimes you'll see this listed as the 10 virgins. 10 bridesmaids is probably a better translation. Sometimes you'll see it as the 5 wise virgins and the 5 foolish virgins. But this is kind of the context of it. He says, a bridegroom goes off to get married. And there are 10 bridesmaids, and they're supposed to get everything ready. Now, that was the custom of the Jewish marriage ceremony. There's a lot of interesting things when you begin looking at the Jewish marriage ceremony. First off, number one, once you were betrothed, you were allowed to have sex with your wife. You didn't have to wait till the actual ceremony. Right? But when the actual ceremony happened, you would do it at your wife's house. You would go to her father's house. And then after the ceremony and everything, your friends would carry you both back to your house. And that's what these 10 virgins are waiting for. That's what these 10 young ladies, these 10 bridesmaids are waiting for. They're waiting for the bridegroom to come back with his bride, and it's their job, it's their responsibility to make sure that the house is ready. More specifically, they're supposed to make sure that the bridal chamber is ready. And so they're waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting. And for whatever reason, we don't know what the reason is, the bridegroom is delayed. And so they're waiting, and they're waiting. Like, everything's ready, but we're waiting. Well, 5 of these bridesmaids had brought lamps with oil in them, just in case it got really late and it got dark. But the other 5 brought no oil, so if it got dark, they're out of luck. Well, sure enough, in the middle of the night, the bridegroom comes back. And when he comes back, those with no oil turn to those with oil and say, hey, how about sharing? And they're like, we can't. If we do that, we won't be able to light our lamps. You guys are going to have to go out there and find your own oil. So off they go. And sure enough, while they're off looking for oil in the middle of the night, bridegroom comes back into the house, doors locked and shut. And the 5 who had no oil, the 5 who were not ready, the 5 who had not prepared adequately, the 5 who were not doing the job they were supposed to be doing are left outside. See, the long-delayed bridegroom comes back, and they're not prepared. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Their job was to be ready and to have lights ready to light the way, and they didn't do it. He tells even another parable. Pastor Dan talked about this parable the other day, the parable of the talents. Let's put it into a slightly different context. A master decides to go away, so he calls several of his servants together. And he says to one of the servants, he says, look, I'm going to give you some money. I'm going to give you 5 talents, which is a pretty large sum of money. He says, and with this money, your responsibility is to take it and to handle it, to manage it. The idea, of course, being that he's going to use it to make more money for the master. He says, because you're a good servant, you get 5. He turns to another one and goes, I'm going to give you 2. You know, you're not as good as he is. He really knows how to handle things. But you're not bad, so I'm going to give you 2. And then to the last one, he gives 1. Okay? He gave to each one according to their level of talent. Okay? And the implication is that each one of them is supposed to use this sum of money and manage it and use it to make the master more wealthy. That's their job. Master goes away, and when he comes back, he calls them all to accounts. First one says, oh yeah, I made you 5 more. Second one, I made you 2 more. Third one, I didn't do anything with it. I just buried it. First one's praised, second one's praised, third one is condemned. In fact, the talent is taken away from him and given to somebody else. And he says, you didn't do your job. I gave you a job, and all you did was bury it. The very least you could have done in your job was put it in the bank, and it would have gotten a little bit of interest. But you have so failed at doing your job, you know, you are a wicked, wicked servant. And he was condemned. In all 3 of these parables, the theme is exactly the same. Look, the master is going away, and he's going to come back, and we don't know when. Any day, any time, any hour, we don't know. But when he comes back, you need to be doing whatever job he has assigned to you. Because if you're caught not doing your job when he comes back, then you will be considered a wicked servant. And that's not a good thing. Jesus tells these 3 stories, and they're just parables, and parables are meant to make a point about the kingdom of heaven. Parables are made to make a point about God and to make them simple. But then he changes. He makes the next story along the same theme very, very personal. See, he tells the story of the separating of the sheep and the goats. So this is the 4th story, and it's along the same theme, and we have to keep remembering he's talking about when. He's answering the question way back in Matthew 24. What are the signs of your coming in power and glory? When? What's it going to be like? He gives them the signs, and he says, but what day? You don't know. But when it happens, be ready. And he tells this story, and it's very, very personal. He tells them about a master who goes away, but this time the master is Jesus. And how do we know it's Jesus talking about himself? Because he says, when the Son of Man returns, when the Son of Man returns. And that phrase, the Son of Man, is another name for the Messiah. The phrase, the Son of Man, is another name for the Christ, the Anointed One. And here his disciples have already admitted, yeah, we believe that you're the Messiah. That's why we're following you. That's why we're your disciples. And so now he makes it very clear to them, when I come back, when I assume my power, when I come back in glory with my angels, this is what it's going to be like. He says it's going to be like a shepherd who separates the sheep from the goats. And over on his right, he's going to put all the sheep, which is a place of honor. And over on the left, a less honorable position, I'm going to put all the goats. He says it's going to be just like that. Sheep on one side, goats on the other. He said, on my right will be all the righteous. And on my left, all the unrighteous. He said, and on that day, when I assume my power, when I come back, I'm going to look at the righteous. And I'm going to say, because when I was gone, you fed those who were hungry. You clothed those who were naked. You visited those who were sick and those who were in need and those who were in jail. Because you've done all this kind of stuff for me, because you clothed me when I was naked, because you clothed me when I was sick and in jail, because you did all these things to me, you're righteous. And they're going to say, well, when did we do it? And he said, whenever you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. He's going to turn to the ones on the left, and he said, hey, because you didn't clothe me, and you didn't feed me, and you didn't take care of me, and you didn't visit me, and you didn't do all these things, you're unrighteous. And they said, well, when did we ever see you in that situation? He says, whatever you did to the least of these, you've done it to me. And Jesus makes the point, hey, I'm going to be coming back, and when I assume my glory, I'm going to check to see if you did your job. What's the job? He says, well, when I'm hungry, you're supposed to feed me. When I'm thirsty, you're supposed to give me drink. When I'm naked, well, we didn't exactly see you. He says, whatever you do to the least of these, this is our job. This is what we're expected to be doing when Christ comes back. We are expected to be loving our neighbor as ourselves. We're expected to do unto others as we would have others do unto us. That when we see a need, we are supposed to be fulfilling that need. That when we see somebody who is hungry, we're supposed to feed them. If we see somebody who is thirsty, we're supposed to offer them drink. They are in need of clothes, we're supposed to offer it to them. We're supposed to take care of one another. We should be expressing the love of God through us. That whatever God blesses us with, we are supposed to then pour it out upon others and bless them with it. That's the task that has been given to us as servants of God. And when the master returns, that's the first thing he's going to be looking for. Are you doing the job I gave to you? Have you fulfilled your responsibility? The faithful and wise servant fulfilled the responsibility. He took care of the other servants and fed them and did that. The virgins with the 5 lamps of oil were prepared. They were doing the job they were supposed to be doing. They had the house ready. They had the lights ready. Everything was ready, like they were supposed to. The people with the talents, the 2, the one with the 5 and the one with the 2 talents, they were doing the job they were supposed to be doing. And when they come back, they are praised for it. And the sheep and the goats, the sheep are the ones who are doing what they were told to do when the master went away. And so we have to stop and we have to ask ourselves, are we doing the job that Jesus gave us before he went away? Had an interesting thing happen to me yesterday. Yesterday, as Dan was saying, I'm back on the board again. Deborah's just been elected to the board. So we have what we call a board advance. We all get together, kind of get to know each other, share some things about each other, talk to each other. Dan facilitates that, does an excellent job of doing that. We kind of, share little secrets, what's your biggest scandal and all that kind of stuff, Okay. Good blackmail information to keep all the elders in line, right? So we're all sharing, we're all talking about this. But before I got there, first off, Dan wants to have it at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, oh man, that's so early, 9 o'clock in the morning, right? Okay, so just like I always do, I'm on my way down to, Dan's place there. And so I stopped to get some coffee, like I always do, because it takes 1 cup of coffee to get my heart started and 2 more to get my brain started. And I thought, well, I should probably be engaged in this elder meeting and have my heart and brain involved too. So So I stopped to get some coffee. As I'm walking up to the Starbucks that I'm always going to, right, there's obviously somebody who's homeless there. Okay? And one of the ways you can kind of tell that they're homeless is, he's got kind of a dirty appearance and long shaggy hair and a big beard and all this kind of stuff. But I noticed that he's doing something else which probably indicates mental illness. He's got a phone with him, okay? But it's not like the kind of phone that you and I have, right? The little cell phones and stuff like that. No, he's got an old-fashioned receiver off of a phone, you know what I'm talking about? And the cord is not there. It's just the receiver on it. That's all it is, just that one part. And he's got it sitting on the table, and he's yelling at it. And he's yelling at the phone, "Stop calling me. This is the wrong number. I'm not the person you want. Stop calling." And of course, as I walk by him, I'm like, "Well, okay, yeah, stop calling that guy. You're bugging him, right?" So I go in to get my coffee, and sure enough, he follows me in, which was kind of weird. I'm like, "Okay, no problem," right? So now he's standing right behind me. And there's more people, and they get in line behind him, and people are beginning to kind of feel uncomfortable. It's like, and he's talking to himself, and people are like, I don't want to be near him and all this kind of stuff, and he smells a little bad, okay, right? So I'm doing my order, and of course the person behind the counter, wanting to get rid of this person as fast as they can, rush over to take his order. He says, "Give me a small cup of coffee," right? And I'm about to pay for my order when he taps me, and he says, "Hey, could you help me with a cup of coffee?" And he's got a handful of change in his hand. And he says, "This is all I got. Can you help me out with a cup of coffee?" And I said, "Sure, not a problem." So I tell the lady at the counter, I say, "Ring up his coffee with my coffee. We'll just ring it up all together," right? And he goes, "Well, you want the money?" And I said, No, you can keep it." And he goes, and then he says this. He says, "You should have answered the phone." Because that call was for you. And so, as I'm walking out with my cup of coffee, so I handed him his cup of coffee. There you go, have a good day and all this kind of stuff, right? And he goes, "Next time you answer the phone." And I'm thinking to myself, I just did, And as I'm walking out, I'm thinking to myself, I'm on my way to this big elder meeting. And I'm working on this parable about, whatever you do to the least of these, you've done to me. I'm like going, Lord, you don't have to make it that obvious. I'm really not that thick, am I? Right? But it would have been kind of cool if the phone actually rang, But apparently he calls on my way to Starbucks, and, I don't answer, but, eventually, that's okay. He sends somebody in there to tell me the phone, Actually, what I told the gentleman when he told me, he said, "You should have answered the phone. It was for you." I told him, I said, "Don't worry, he'll call back." And he's like, and he's a little grouchy about the guy who's going to call back, because especially since it's for me, but that's okay. Sometimes you'll miss the opportunities if you don't see them, but don't worry, God will call back. He will. And speaking of calling back, he's going to come back. It's interesting that the disciples may have missed this point. They were all concerned about, well, when will you be coming into your glory? When will you be coming into your power? And he tells them 4 stories in a row on the same theme, about a master who goes away, about a bridegroom who goes away, about the Son of Man who goes away. And he will be coming back. And when he comes back, he wants to see us doing the job he assigned to us. And the job he assigned to us as modern-day disciples is to love one another and take care of each other. To take every blessing that God gives you and pour it out upon other people so that they can be blessed as well. I think it's funny. End times have always been a topic of fascination for a lot of people. And I'll admit that I've read too many books on the subject. There was a time, I'm part of that generation, kind of that late 70s, early 80s, where we were just fascinated by all the end times. Hal Lindsey and The Late Great Planet Earth, all those books. I read them all. I read every last one of them. And I've lived through so many false predictions and so many supposed ends of the world that it kind of makes me sad. I'm like, really? Here we go with more predictions. And I've realized by reading that these 4 parables, I can just set my Mayan calendar down, right? I don't need to be predicting what day. I don't need to be predicting the day or the hour of when something's going to be happening, right? There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. The Mayan calendar thing, 2012 didn't pan out. Okay, but don't worry. According to the Viking calendar, it's supposed to be 2014. You didn't know that. You haven't been reading all those emails my crazy aunt sends me from her religious group. Okay? And if you don't believe that, don't worry. There's this whole blood moon prophecy thing going on with counting the number of blood moons happening this year, culminating on Passover with a lunar eclipse. And if you don't know about that, you're not reading all the right books. Yeah, I'm just kidding. Okay? This year, there's 3 or 4 different theories about why the world's going to end this year. And I have a feeling it probably won't, just like all the other times. What I've come to realize in looking at all these parables is we do not need to worry about the day or about the hour. What we need to worry about is, are we doing the will of the Master? So that when he returns, he looks at us and he says, there you are, good and faithful one, doing exactly what I asked you to do when I went away. You're in charge of the servants. Make sure they're fed and give them their wages and taken care of. You're in charge of making sure that when I come back, everything is ready. You're in charge of, I gave you these resources and you use them to increase the kingdom. So that when it comes to that point of sheep and goats, I want to be on the side of the sheep, where he says, you fed me, you clothed me, you took care of me, you visited me when I was sick, you visited me in prison. Lord, when did I do that? Whenever you did it the least of these. I kind of feel good. I'll brag a little bit. I'm like going, yesterday I bought Jesus a cup of coffee. Here you go, Jesus. Thank you for the phone call. Stop yelling at the phone now. Looks strange. Don't do that anymore, right? But that's the question you have to ask yourself. Stop asking when. The when is not the important part. The important part is, are you doing your job, and will you be doing it when he comes back again? With that, I'm going to close up with prayer. We'll have the praise team come on back up. Join me in prayer.